The little girl's shoes slapped frantically against the polished hospital floor as tears streamed down her face. "Please!" she cried, her tiny voice cracking with terror. "Please help my mommy. They hurt her! She's bleeding!" People turned. Doctors glanced over briefly before rushing past with clipboards and ringing phones. Nurses paused for half a second, assuming security would handle it. Visitors stared with sympathy but kept walking. But the child wasn't running toward the emergency desk. She was running toward the old janitor mopping the hallway near the elevators. He looked up slowly as the little girl crashed into him, gripping his faded work jacket with trembling hands. "Please," she sobbed. "They beat my mom. She's dying." The mop clattered onto the floor. For a moment, the janitor said nothing. Most people in the building barely noticed him. He was just the quiet older man who cleaned the halls at night and fixed broken carts when maintenance was too busy. His gray uniform hung loosely on his thin frame, and his name tag simply read, Walter. But the second he looked into the child's terrified eyes, something inside him changed. His posture straightened. His expression sharpened. And suddenly, he didn't look old anymore. "Where is she?" he asked calmly. The little girl pointed toward the parking garage entrance, struggling to breathe through her panic. Walter moved instantly. Not rushed, not confused, focused. The girl ran beside him as they pushed through the emergency doors into the cold. Chicago night. A black SUV sat crooked near the curb with the driver's side door hanging open. A woman lay partially collapsed against the seat, blood staining her white blouse. Two security guards stood nearby arguing into radios. "We already called trauma," one shouted. "She's losing too much blood!" Walter dropped to his knees beside her. The woman's face was pale, her breathing shallow. And then he froze. Recognition flashed across his eyes. "Rachel." The injured woman blinked weakly. "Walt?" she whispered. One of the guards frowned. "You know her?" Walter ignored him. His hands moved expertly over the wound near her ribs. Not like a janitor. Like someone who had done this 1,000 times. "Get me towels now," he barked. The authority in his voice stunned everyone. The guard actually obeyed. The little girl clung to Walter's shoulder. "Is my mommy gonna die?" Walter looked at her gently. "Not while I'm here." Inside the hospital, chaos exploded. The injured woman was Rachel Mercer, ex-wife of billionaire tech CEO Daniel Mercer, one of the most powerful men in Chicago. News of the attack spread through the building within minutes. Doctors rushed Rachel into surgery while hospital staff tried calming her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. But Sophie refused to leave Walter's side. She sat beside him in the waiting room, clutching his rough hand while he cleaned blood from his knuckles in silence. "You knew my mommy?" she asked softly. Walter nodded once. "A long time ago." Before Sophie could ask more, the hospital entrance burst open. Daniel Mercer stormed inside, surrounded by security. Tall, expensive suit. Controlled fury radiating from every step. "Where's my daughter?" he demanded. Sophie immediately ran to him. The CEO dropped to his knees, holding her tightly. "Daddy!" "She's okay," Daniel whispered quickly. "I'm here." Then Sophie pointed toward Walter. "He saved Mommy." Daniel looked up. His eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of the janitor. For half a second, confusion crossed his face. Then shock. "Walter Hayes?" Walter stood slowly. The two men stared at each other across the waiting room, carrying years of history neither expected to revisit. "You work here?" Daniel asked quietly. Walter shrugged. "Someone has to clean the floors." Daniel looked unsettled. Because 20 years earlier, Walter Hayes had been one of the most respected trauma surgeons in the country, the kind newspapers called brilliant, the kind hospitals fought to hire. And then one night everything disappeared. No interviews, no explanations. He simply vanished from medicine. People assumed scandal. Others whispered addiction, lawsuits, mental collapse, but nobody actually knew, until now. "You're a doctor?" Sophie gasped. Walter gave a tired smile. "I used to be." Before Daniel could speak again, the operating room doors swung open. A surgeon hurried toward them. "We stabilized her, but she lost a dangerous amount of blood," the doctor said. "Honestly, whoever treated her outside bought us the time we needed." His eyes shifted toward Walter. "That compression technique saved her life." The room fell silent. Daniel stared at Walter differently now. Not as a janitor, as the man who had just saved the mother of his child. Hours later, Rachel finally regained consciousness. Walter stood quietly near the doorway while Daniel sat beside her bed. Rachel's weak eyes found Walter almost immediately. "You still do that thing," she whispered faintly. Walter frowned slightly. "What thing?" "Save people before thinking about yourself." Daniel looked between them. "You two knew each other better than I realized." Rachel gave a soft laugh that turned painful. "He trained me." Daniel blinked. Rachel had once been an ER nurse before marrying into wealth. "He was the best doctor I ever saw," she continued weakly. "Patients adored him." Sophie climbed carefully onto the bed beside her mother. "Then why's he a janitor?" The room went quiet. Walter looked down at the floor. Rachel's expression filled with sadness. "Because life can hurt good people too." Daniel studied Walter carefully. "What happened?" For a long moment, Walter said nothing. Then Sophie reached for his hand again. And somehow, that small gesture broke the wall he'd spent 20 years building. "My wife died," he said quietly. The words landed heavily in the room. "She came into the hospital where I worked. After a drunk driver hit her car." His jaw tightened. "I was the best trauma surgeon in the building, but hospital policy wouldn't let family operate." Rachel lowered her eyes. Walter continued softly. "I stood outside the operating room while other doctors tried saving her. And they made mistakes." His voice cracked for the first time. "Mistakes I knew how to fix." Nobody spoke. "I lost her anyway." Sophie squeezed his fingers tighter. "After that, I couldn't hold a scalpel anymore." Daniel exhaled slowly. "So you disappeared?" Walter nodded. "I didn't want awards anymore. Didn't want money. Didn't want people calling me extraordinary when I couldn't. Save the only person who mattered." The room sat in painful silence. Then Rachel spoke gently. "But you still stayed near hospitals." Walter looked around the room quietly. "I guess part of me never stopped wanting to help." The next morning, everything changed. News of Rachel's attack hit national headlines after police revealed she had been assaulted during an attempted kidnapping, tied to Daniel Mercer's business rivals. But another story spread even faster. Security footage leaked online, showing an elderly janitor taking control of the emergency scene before doctors arrived. America became obsessed. Who was the janitor hero? Within hours, reporters uncovered Walter's past as the vanished surgical legend. The internet exploded. Former patients shared stories about the doctor who had once held their hands before surgery. Nurses described how he stayed overnight comforting scared families. One viral post simply read, "The world thought he disappeared." Turns out he never stopped saving people. By evening, television vans surrounded the hospital. Executives offered Walter consulting jobs worth millions. A famous medical center in Boston publicly invited him to return to surgery. Walter turned them all down. "I'm not interested," he told Daniel quietly while cleaning a hallway later that night. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. "You could have your old life back." Walter dipped his mop into the bucket again. "That life wasn't what made me happy." "Then what does?" Before Walter could answer, small arms wrapped around his waist. "Sophie." "You do," she said. Walter's eyes softened instantly. Over the following weeks, Rachel recovered steadily, and somehow Walter became part of their lives. Not because of fame, not because of gratitude, because Sophie refused to let him go. She waited for him after school inside the hospital cafeteria. She brought him badly drawn pictures to hang in his janitor closet. She told everyone proudly that her best friend smelled like soap and peppermint candy. For the first time in decades, Walter laughed again. Really laughed. One snowy evening near Christmas, Daniel found Walter fixing a broken wheelchair near the entrance. "You know," Daniel said carefully, "Sophie asked if you're coming to dinner tomorrow." Walter smiled faintly. "I don't think billionaires usually invite janitors for Christmas." Daniel looked at him seriously. "She didn't invite a janitor." Walter paused. "She invited family." Emotion flickered across Walter's face so quickly he almost hit it. Almost. The next night, Walter sat awkwardly at a massive dining table glowing with candlelight while Sophie proudly placed a paper star above his seat. Rachel watched him quietly from across the room. "You saved more than my life that night," she said softly. Walter looked confused. Rachel smiled gently toward Sophie. You reminded her the world still has good people in it. Sophie leaned against Walter's arm sleepily. And you reminded all of us. Outside, snow drifted softly across the city. Inside, warmth-filled spaces Payne had occupied for years. Walter Hayes had once been known as a brilliant surgeon. But in the end, that wasn't what made people remember him. It was his kindness. Because the greatest thing he ever healed wasn't found in an operating room. It was the broken hearts of people who thought humanity had disappeared. And all it took was one little girl brave enough to ask a janitor for help.